Hi again, David here.
And Aisha, congratulations.
You're just about halfway home. Step 3.
Crafting your story.
But what exactly does that mean?
Well, now that you've found a compassion story to tell,
And told it for the first time.
you're ready to shape your storytelling into something that you can really be proud of.
We can do this by focusing on 3 things:
A strong beginning,
the hook,
a climax,
the moment,
and a message or moral.
the payoff.
We've been over this once before, right?
On day 1.
After we watched Marwan and Miranda's stories of compassion.
But it's like a magic trick.
When you see it the first time,
You've got no idea how it's done.
so we're going to break it down together.
And share some secrets for success.
Let's begin by watching Compassion story number 3 from Richard.
My big brother Mike was a terrible bully. It took me more than 30 years to figure out why. I'm Richard, and this is my story of compassion for Spirit Corps. Mike was a big guy, a tackle on his high school football team and a varsity wrestler. Nobody messed with him, and certainly not me. I was nearly 9 years younger and did my very best to stay on his good side. In fact, I was his favorite in the family and the only one to whom he ever seemed to show even the slightest bit of tenderness. Still, when you played catch with Mike, he would throw the baseball as hard as he possibly could, right at your face. You either caught it or, like me, missed one time and got your nose broken. He seemed to always be looking for a fight. Mike did collegiate-style wrestling. One wrestler starts on his hands and knees, while the other is on top with one arm wrapped around the midsection of the bottom wrestler and the second hand gripping their opponent's forearm. On the count of 3, the one on top tries to pin the other, while the bottom wrestler tries to get free. How do I know this? Mike liked to practice on me. Now, when he was wrestling in high school, my brother was 17 and weighed 210 pounds, minimum. I was 8 or 9 and weighed in at 70, maybe 75 after a big dinner. And as you may have already guessed, he would always put me on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, he would slam his hand on the floor, flip me on my back, and collapse on top, pinning me instantly with all of his weight. Boys will be boys, as we used to say, right? Right, if that had been the end of it. But Mike would not get up. He just laid there on top of me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And no matter how hard I tried or how loud I begged, he would not budge, even as I gasped. And fear gripped me to the core. It seemed like forever. With me at the edge of blacking out, or God knows what, he would finally decide to set me free. Worst of all, on threat of even graver tortures from him, I let this happen more than once, and I hated him for it. With a quiet vengeance that lasted half my life. In fact, even as an adult, I avoided Mike at family gatherings and never reached out to call or check in, as siblings often do. Until one day, a childhood memory came flooding back, a memory of Mike. It was late on a rainy afternoon, and he came crashing through the front door, blood streaming down his face. I hadn't put it together for all these years, but it was suddenly crystal clear. Mike had been beaten up, and beaten up bad. It must have taken a bunch of guys to do it. I later learned from my other brother that, yeah, Mike was getting jumped all the time in high school. He was a victim too. Something changed for me that day. Feeling my brother's pain, compassion opened my eyes and my heart. All that anger I had felt for so many years just seemed to fade away. Sure, he could be brutal, but now I knew why. Because he was getting brutalized. He made me suffer because he was suffering. It had nothing to do with me. I was just that 8-year-old caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's passed away now, but not before giving me an unexpected and really beautiful gift, a chance to open my heart, put aside hatred, and experience the joy of totally forgiving him. Thanks for listening. We hope you will share your story of compassion and join the Spirit Corps conversation. Together, we grow.
Okay, wow, where to begin?
At the beginning, right? With the hook.
Not exactly. You can't know how to get your viewer interested.
Until you know what you want them to be interested in.
Start your story crafting with the climax, the moment.
A specific point in time or event when everything becomes clear.
Or changes. In Marwan's story,
When the light bulb suddenly switched on and he was able to imagine needing help himself.
in Miranda's story,
When she realizes, despite her fears, that deep down nothing had changed,
and the love she needed most right then.
was her own.
So let's look again at the script for Richard's story.
And working together, find his moment.
Here's a hint. It's somewhere on the screen right now.
Welcome back.
We'll bet you landed on one of two spots.
When Richard is gasping for his life.
Or these lines. I hadn't put it together for all these years, but it was suddenly crystal clear.
Mike had been beaten up, and beaten up bad.
We're going with option 2.
True, there would be no story to tell if Richard hadn't been abused by his big brother.
But this is a compassion story. So where is the moment, the climax,
When Richard is finally able to put himself in Mike's shoes.
and feel his brother's pain?
When you look back, you'll see his whole story builds to this.
And that's no accident. He's built his whole story around this.
That should be true of your story as well.
That's why we start here with the moment.
So, let's move on.
The payoff is the point,
The moral, what you learned,
how you grew.
and why it's so important. For instance,
When Miranda finally realizes that it's not about her hair,
it's about her heart
or when Marwan learns that something beautiful can blossom.
in the filthiest of places.
So please stop our video now and find the payoff in Richard's story. Okay, the way we see it, Richard's payoff has 2 parts.
First, compassion opened his eyes.
It wasn't about him, right?
Mike was brutal because he was getting brutalized.
But that's only part of the lesson in this story.
Compassion also opens his heart.
All that anger he'd been holding on to for 30 years.
He could finally let that go.
And forgive. The payoff is your gift to the listener.
But like many a good gift giver, think Santa. Get in and get out fast.
After your story has climaxed in the moment, keep the payoff short and sweet.
If you're clear about what you learned,
And why it's important, make your point.
and go.
This will leave your listener.
Thinking.
And now it's time for
The hook.
Tell us why we should be interested.
Right up front.
Why should we care?
It's a tease.
Make the audience want to know more.
Without giving it all away.
This is your promise to the listener.
That your story will be worth their time.
Marwan. Little did I know where my gift would come from.
It wasn't in a trash can. I found it in a place way worse.
Wow. This has both ingredients of a great hook.
Number 1, you can't quite figure it out.
Number 2, but you really want to.
Or Miranda. When the hair on my head started falling out,
I knew something was terribly wrong.
do you want to know more?
There's a mystery here.
that she promises to solve.
Your listeners should feel like they don't know where they're going.
But they sense somehow you're going to take them there.
So, writing the hook is pretty easy.
And only possible.
Once you know where the story is going, the moment.
And why it's going there. The payoff.
Marwan knows his story climaxes when he finally decides to wade into the sewer.
And he knows what he learned. You can find beautiful gifts where you least expect them.
So he teases us. What could be more foul than a trash can?
Okay, here's the beginning of Richard's story.
Please stop the video and find his hook. Did you land on his first 2 sentences?
My big brother Mike was a terrible bully.
It took me 30 years to figure out why.
Can you feel Richard's promise here? If it took him 30 years,
That's quite a mystery.
but he found the answer.
And maybe we'll find an answer for ourselves in his story somehow.
Once you start paying attention, you'll begin to see hooks everywhere.
At the beginning of every Netflix episode.
Or often, right at the end.
That's why you keep watching. Or shall we say, binging.
Nearly every pop song has a hook
It makes you want to keep listening.
and promises you're gonna love it.
So, here are your next steps.
Number 1, reread your first draft with your partner and find the moment.
If it's not entirely clear yet, talk it through.
And figure it out. Don't be afraid to be a little creative here.
Maybe you don't remember exactly the way it happened. No problem.
Make it up.
He didn't say lie. Just use your imagination a bit if you need to.
It's a story, after all. Don't be afraid to make it a good one.
Okay, after you've each found your moment, move on to the payoff.
Talk it through. What did you learn?
And why is that important? Not just to you.
To all of us.
Then, finally, the hook.
Make it interesting.
Or mysterious.
Have fun.
Now, with your 3 elements in place, just fill in the gaps for your second draft.
Marwan does that by telling us about the open sewers in his neighborhood.
And how he'd avoid it, even on cleanup days, at all costs.
Miranda describes the clumps of hair in her hand.
And the terror she felt at losing the one thing she could count on. Her beauty.
We can't feel how much is at stake for her here without knowing that.
What details does your story need in order to set up the climax?
Richard has to tell us about what a tough guy his big brother was.
The danger of playing catch with Mike, and the broken nose he has to prove it.
Or gasping for his life under 210 pounds of dead weight.
We have to know that.
If Mike was always sweet and gentle,
Or weighed in at under 100,
there wouldn't be anything for Richard to forgive.
nothing for him to learn.
So once you've filled in the details,
And gone over it a few times,
you're ready to send this draft to your coach.
but wait, there's more?
You've already done a whole lot of work on this.
And now you're showing it to your first audience, your story coach,
Adults who are specially trained to give you great feedback.
Spirit Corps style.
So take these notes to heart when you get them,
They'll be very supportive and honest.
which doesn't mean you have to do everything they recommend.
But there will be something right in most everything they say.
Your job is to listen, to take in their comments.
And you'll have help from your story partner.
You'll go over the coach's notes together.
And see what lands, what actually feels right to you.
Then go through the story one last time on your own.
To make it all that you want it to be.
End of phase 2.
You'll see us one more time,
In a few days,
so enjoy.
help each other.
Remember, this can be challenging stuff.
So let's practice compassion for our partner.
And ourselves.